This evening. I'm going to just welcome you, and then Hannah is going to introduce the evening. And I want to tell you, this series, some of you will have heard this last week, but it's fun to tell about the stamina of this little series. We're the third iteration of a reading and conversation series that began in 1985, hosted by Vi and Ned Coffin through 1997. And then after a little break, it resumed from 2000 to 2006, and again revived in 2012, during which time we've had 70 people come, luminaries from all over the globe, really, including playwright Arthur Miller, economist John Kenneth Galbraith, governors Madeline Kunin and Howard Dean, activist authors Grace Paley and William Sloane Coffin, filmmaker John Sayles, poet Jane Hirschfield, novelist Russell Banks and Jeffrey Maguire, and 5 of Vermont's poet laureates. We want to thank our generous sponsors, the Byrne Foundation, an anonymous donor, several local businesses, including Kate Seatman Design, Agatha's, and Planet Hair. So let those proprietors know that you noticed that they're supporting the series, and also the fabulous Norwich Bookstore, who has brought books for tonight's featured reader, Jefff Sharlet, but also for the whole series. So if you want to prepare for the next 2 weeks, which I'll tell you about in a moment, here's your chance. Next Thursday, which is August 24th, we'll have Stratford's own, at least part of the time, Gregory Maguire, and also novelist M.T. Anderson. They're authors of books for voracious readers of young adult fiction, which includes, of course, many adults. And our final evening will be Thursday, August 28th, featuring poet Jeffrey Harrison and musician, raconteur, and also author Jim Rooney, who will certainly have his guitar as well as a sheaf of papers. So I'm going to introduce Hannah Silverstein. I'm aware as I do this that last year I went to a reading by Junot Diaz, which commenced with an introduction by Dartmouth's president, followed by an introduction by the chair of the foundation, the Montgomery Foundation, followed by an introduction by the chair of the Latin American Studies Department, followed by the introduction of Junot Diaz by someone else. So we're not going to do that. But I will introduce Hannah, who is a writer. I met her when we worked together at Chelsea Green. She's a fine editor as well. And she has done some journalistic work on this 40 Towns project, so she'll be able to tell you about the occasion of the evening. Thank you very much, and please join me, Hannah.
Hello. Well, the last time I was on this stage, it was to get married, so. But we are so lucky to have Jefff Sharlet with us today, and not just because he is an accomplished writer in his own right, which he is, and if you haven't read any of his work, there's much of it for sale at the table over there. But since he's come to Dartmouth as a professor, he has also been a committed teacher, and part of his teaching is really to push his students to open themselves to the world that's right around them, which in this instance is the Upper Valley. And in doing so, he's created a forum both for their writing, which is magnificent, some of the best student writing that I've seen. And he's also opened a window, they've opened a window on our community, on parts of our community that we might have thought we have known, but that we see with new eyes now. And so, from speed dating in White River Junction, to flying airplanes in Post Mills, to the bread baker in Norwich who puts up our sign every week. These are stories of people in our community, people we know. And it's not just that the students are telling these stories, it's that they are living as part of these stories. They're becoming part of this community, becoming part of the stories, and sharing that experience with us. And if you haven't taken a look at 40towns.com, I urge you to do so. And now I'm going to ask Jefff Sharlet to come up on the stage and introduce Max and Lauren, who will be reading for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is a real treat for me. One, because I don't have to prepare too much. I have some great writers to bring to you, and also to be in this lovely place, which I just learned tonight, that one of the neighbors of this building, Ned Coffin, called it the Church of Democracy. That's a good place for telling true stories, for telling nonfiction stories. And Jim suggested that I might say a word about this genre that you're going to be hearing tonight. I teach creative writing at Dartmouth College, and specifically I practice and teach. It's a genre that Dartmouth calls creative nonfiction. I don't like to use that term. I find it offensive to my colleagues who teach nonfiction and may feel that they're creative, and with it, it causes trouble. But the genre is always known as kind of a mashup. Other terms for it are lyric essay and literary journalism, immersion journalism, submersion journalism. I like to call it mutant journalism, partly because it is always this mashup genre, this sort of unholy alliance of two things, taking the techniques of fiction and applying them, as you'll hear tonight, to truly rigorous reporting, to stories rooted, built on facts. These are true stories. They are stranger than fiction, as all true stories are, and they're also researched. They're fact-checked. And although their authors are perhaps young compared to some of the other writers you see on the stage, these stories are remarkable. And I thought of this in sort of explaining what we're doing here, that I should say something about this thing, 40towns.com, and I feel like a salesman. 40towns.com. Go to 40towns.com. Don't buy my books. Go to 40towns.com. Sorry, Karen. Sorry, Norwich Books. I love Norwich Books, but go to 40towns.com. Because they've done this really great work, and that's where actually this began. This began with an emotion that doesn't often get paid tribute to in sort of literary settings, which is envy. And specifically my envy, that I was teaching at Dartmouth, and every term I would have students write these stories that were so good that I wished I had written them. And I thought about, like, it would be really easy just to take their name off and put my name on and send this out in the world. No one will know. It was that good. And in fact, I tell my students to pay attention to envy, to pay attention to the stories and poems and essays that you read and that you love and that you say, as a writer, I wish I could do that. And then you think, maybe I could do that. And then you go out and you do that. And that's what Max and Lauren and the other writers of this website, 40towns.com, have done. And what they have done is remarkable and has been recognized as it really surpassed all expectations. We wanted to create this publication. We made it a website so that everyone could read it. Very quickly, we rocketed past the Georgia Review. We passed the Virginia Quarterly Review. Suddenly, we were on this stage of readership that very sort of august literary journals, gray eminences of the literary world, couldn't meet. And we were doing that because these true stories reported by young writers who had an advantage. And I think this is sort of an interesting thing about teaching creative writing. The reality is that you teach creative writing, you teach fiction, you teach poetry. You enjoy reading the work because it's by your students. You would not necessarily press it upon a room full of people in the Church of Democracy. The difference with nonfiction is, and Max and Lauren can speak to this and maybe disagree with me, young writers come to it a little bit more innocent of the genre, this mutant genre. They've read fiction before, they've read poetry before, they have, if they're studying poetry, they've read poetry before. They have an idea of what these things should look like. They may have a bad Harry Potter-shaped idea of what these things should look like, but nonfiction, they don't know. They have to reinvent the wheel. The formulas are not there for them. And what that allows them to do is very quickly, and I heard this from my colleagues in the magazine world, editors at Rolling Stone and the New Yorker and Harper's and all these places saying, these stories are wonderful, these are the kind of stories that I wish I could tell, but we're kind of bound by the formulas of magazines. They're not bound. They are bound by truth, they are bound by fact, this attempt to tell true stories. So that's what 40 Towns became, and it got this great readership, and it became something much more than a student publication. And I think that's also partly because of our commitment to place, and in particular to this place. It's named after the rough count of the towns in the Upper Valleys, 40 towns. And first I found this account that said 40 towns. I said, that's great, what a number, 40 days, 40 nights, 40 towns is perfect. Then, there's an Upper Valley Chamber of Commerce, and they've been forever escalating the number. I think they're up to 53 towns, but we'll stick with 40 towns. And we'll stick with the local, we'll stick with the concentration on what happens here, that important things may happen here. And in particular about New England. I moved here 4 years ago, and as you Straffordites, as I learned, I was going to call you Straffordians, which you should call yourself, because that sounds better, Straffordians. But Straffordites know, this place is more this place, really, than any other place in America. We talk about Southern regional literature. I've traveled all over the United States. The South is Walmart. Stratford is this place. So there's a lot of potential in writing about local places, and at the same time, you can also touch on these universal themes. And I thought, before we get into the sort of the deep dive of Max and Lauren's stories, because we could only bring 2 writers with us tonight, I would give you a few little paragraph samples from some of the other stories, from some of the other students, and I'm just going to do my best to do them justice. This is from a story by Kelsey Stimson, who was the editor of our current volume of 40towns.com. This is a story called Wasted. She said she was going to hang around at a garbage dump. And I had been wanting a student to do that ever since I got here. I said, how could you miss the garbage dump? Talk about an interesting place. I thought it was going to be a kind of a folksy environmental story, and it turned out to be sort of the most terrifying thing I've read in a while. This is about a particular contraption at the Lebanon Townfield called the Terminator. The Terminator can take tons of wood and turn it into a pile an eighth or a tenth of its original size. We call that downsizing, Keith, the man who operates it, says. He tells me about the time they threw a propane tank in, because a Terminator isn't scared of metal, not even whole cars, and the teeth scraped along the smooth steel skin at such a speed that it shot straight back out, like a rocket, peaking however many feet above their heads. And as it fell back down into the dirt, they could still hear the noise of the metal hitting the teeth, scratching like nails at their eardrums. What an awful, awful noise, Keith says, and he smiles. That's great, right? You get this and you're a teacher and I gotta grade papers. I feel sorry for my colleagues, there's the 100th paper on Plato, and I get this, 100th, 1000th. This is from another classmate of Max and Lauren's, Jamie Alliott's, and his aptly named essay, Dark Shit. The psych ward was like any other. Crazies, half-crazies, not crazies, druggies, wannabe druggies, felons, farmers, preachers, perverts, bankers, cat ladies, recidivists all, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, Grammys and pop-pops, nieces and nephews, fighting over change, over phone time, fighting to make calls that no one really wants to answer. Howling, tears, seizures, foam, Specialists who want to help but can't, who fancy themselves serene but always lose their cool. Medication to get off medications. Chores done and undone. Violence over Jell-O. Group, no therapy. Folks peeping into your room every 2 hours to make sure you're still breathing, leaving the door cracked, open enough for a single slant of light to keep you company, keep you awake, keep you from dreaming. I should say that the stories on 40 Towns are not all sweetness and light and folksy local color. We do have a number. Do we have any editors of Upper Valley Life or Hanover Magazine here or anything like that? Okay, good. I can talk trash about them. When I moved to this area, I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted something like the great alt weeklies, what the Village Voice was once upon a time. I came up as a writer at the San Diego Reader, and the city that Dick Nixon called his lucky town. You know, you could dig into the dark side, and not exclusively the dark side, the whole entirety of the story. And these students started bringing back these stories. I started learning about the homeless camp behind the Kmart in West Lebanon. I learned about really wonderful institutions like Headrest and the Haven, and I learned about them from the inside. That's what these young writers approaching the world without formulas, without preconceptions can do. This is a piece, a short excerpt from a piece by Claire Grodin, who's now off writing for the New Republic. This is called In God's Time. And if you've ever noticed the Upper Valley Pregnancy Center over in West Lebanon, it's a crisis pregnancy center. She would decide to find out what that was about. So this piece of duct tape, call it Natasha. Natasha has a boyfriend, guy number 1, and they're having sex. Anne Margaret Burge, director of the Upper Valley Pregnancy Center, mimed wrapping a piece of duct tape around her arm. Eventually they break up, and Natasha has to peel herself off. She unwrapped the invisible tape from her arm slowly enough that I could imagine the ache. Natasha met guy number 2, then guy number 3, and another, all hairy arms that she bound around before being torn away, collecting hairs and dead skin. Before long, Anne explained, her stickiness, her sexual history, was clogged with residue. She would never wrap as tightly as she did around guy number 1. Eventually, she couldn't wrap around an arm at all without fluttering away limply to the floor, useless. Anne looked up from her outstretched arm, grinning. See, stickiness is bonding. Girls have a hard time bonding even with their children if they have too many partners. She spoke earnestly and confidently, punctuating her sentences with wide-eyed smiles and open-handed gestures. Her pinky-sized cross glinted on a chain around her neck. This was interesting to me. I've written in the past, I've done a lot of reporting on Christian conservatism, Christian fundamentalism, and there is an assumption that that's something that happens somewhere else, that those kind of ideas, whether you agree with them or whether you don't, are not part of the New England fabric. Not part of the New England fabric. I mean, New England invented these ideas. And here they still are. And this wonderful young writer, Claire Grodin, discovered them. That piece is coming. Some of the pieces you're hearing from are there on 40towns.com now. The first 2 I read from are there. And some are coming in part 2 of volume 2, which is coming this fall. And last, I'll just read you a short little excerpt from another one of these forthcoming pieces. It gives you a sense of the world around you that these writers can touch on before we get into much greater depth. This is by Chisholm Obiakoy. It's called Death in the Valley. This is a forthcoming piece. She wrote about an embalmer. This is my favorite part, an undertaker. This is my favorite part, the undertaker says, the embalming. During this time, he plans the visitation and the funeral. Watching the yellow-orange liquid move into the body and the dark red blood flow out. He likes to make lists with the embalming machine humming in the background. A list of things to do, a list of things to buy, a list of cliché sayings to include in the obituary or in the memorial or in the elegy, a list of songs that might embody the spirit of the dead or might ease the members of the immediate family who fall into one another, crying in the front pew of the church. He likes jazz. He likes the way Chris Botti trumpets melancholy into what he had once thought to be happy songs. He makes you want to smile and cry, the undertaker says. But most families prefer those cheesy funeral songs, the classic ones. These things always end up sounding more and more like the soundtrack to Titanic, or worse yet, Beaches. He begins to sing the opening verse of Bette Midler's Wind Beneath My Wings. When he reaches the chorus, he stands and throws his arms open, knocking a metal tray off the table. The clang of the tray against the floor stops him. He removes his glasses and places them on his head. He clears his throat. Maybe we should move upstairs, he says. And that story just gets stranger and stranger until young Chisholm finds herself in a coffin. Don't worry, it's okay, she's alive. All these students doing things that if they had told me they were going to do them first, I would have said, no, please don't do that while you're in my class. After, that sounds great, but not while I'm in charge or responsible for you. And that certainly applies. That certainly applies to our first reader tonight, Lauren Russell, who's going to read a story about a remarkable man. Some of you may have heard about him. David Vincelette, is that how you say his name? David Vincelette was in the news a little bit, banned from Dartmouth campus for an alleged sort of incident with the head of security. I didn't know that when Lauren started writing about him. I didn't know that she was going off to talk to this interesting man, a man with a long history in the Upper Valley, going back to the shanty town of the 1980s that some of you may know about on the town green when they built a shanty town to oppose apartheid. Well, this guy stuck around, and Lauren found him in the woods of Hanover and discovered a story of a true original character. It turned out not to be a frightening man, but to be a fascinating one. And that's what she's going to share with us. Lauren, I should say, is a native of Greenwich, Connecticut. Both our readers tonight are from Connecticut. And I felt bad about that because I wanted to bring you a more sort of exotic setting. So Lauren's father is Brazilian, half Brazilian. So for tonight, we're saying that Lauren is from Brazil, and nothing wrong with Connecticut. We just want diversity. Lauren began writing with me last year in a course where you went into the archives and you tried to resurrect the dead. You'd go and find these strange characters, and she discovered the Sanborn there's a Sanborn library at Dartmouth, and I work in a building called Sanborn, and I had never even thought to wonder who this Sanborn was. And Lauren discovered the Sanborn family, and more strangely, she discovered their absolute obsession with dogs. They're famous. They were nationally famous for their dogs. Is that right? A world authority on dogs. And strange, peculiar characters, just like the one she's going to introduce us to. That is what marks her as a writer, the person who looks at what seems ordinary to us, a nature preserve in Hanover, a college building, and wonders about it and asks questions about it and finds the story within. Lauren Russell.
Good. My introduction to Dave Vincelet's home precedes my encounter with Dave Vincelet himself. On my 5th phone call, I've assured myself he's not going to pick up. I'm right. Dave Vincelet has not been an easy man to track down, despite the fact that I know exactly where he lives, that I've been to where he lives just the day before, wandering around Mink Brook with a trail map in my hand, limp, useless. Of course, his shanty town, as it's been called, isn't shown on the trail map of the Hanover Conservancy. The Wilderness Preserve is a well-known oasis in which Dave's property takes up much space, but remains invisible to many. It is not technically in the preserve. Dave lives on an island of land between the Angelo Tanzi Reserve and the Mink Brook Nature Preserve, separated by the brook on what used to be Native American land. A very overgrown oasis, I think, tramping through leaves and whacking at the branches to find Dave. No one's there. It's eerily silent among the detritus. his hobby, his livelihood, his home. Used scrub sinks from the hospital, boats whole side up, blighted by moss and mold, boxes of old ski equipment, errant road signs, a garbage can spilling glass beer bottles onto the ground, and what looks to be hundreds of tires, hulking, unidentified objects covered in blue tarps. I wait, and I'm not disappointed. Dave Vincelette emerges from the woods just as I reach a fork in the main trail. I follow him down a smaller trail that traces his property in meandering line before becoming a path leading to the main house, furrowed through his mounds of stuff. Time lapses slowly in shy and tentative small talk before he tells me, "The house is never finished. We're always adding to it." They say, "Is your house done?" I say, "No, it's not going to be done till the day I die." He tells me about the Tanzis, who owned this land before him. Angelo Tanzi had a fruit stand in Hanover, where they also sold beer. He did well. The Tanzis had 4 cabins and 9 kids. He tells me that when he was first working on his house, Mrs. Mary Tanzi used to warm him up with shots of whiskey and games of gin rummy during those long winters with no heat. I was sleeping in my winter mountain warfare clothes and a sleeping bag in a room, and I'd work all day building the house. There was no house to hide in. It was just a room. And in the daytime, she would bring me some little snack. She'd bring me tea bags and Snicker bars and different things, and showed me where all the different wildflowers grew. I study his face as he talks, committing it to memory. His ice blue eyes, one of his only features untouched by dirt, are clear and piercing, and his hair has gone all gray. The bottom half of his nose is disjointed from the top, perhaps from a motorcycle accident, after which he had to get multiple face reconstructions. The end is slightly turned up, and I can see right up into the black cavities of his nostrils. He takes me to the waterfall at the edge of his property, the brook that moats his recycled kingdom off from the trail on the other side, where young girls and couples in athletic shorts and smart sneakers are hiking past with their golden retrievers, eyes forward, not seeing, perhaps just ignoring. 2 trees are suspended across the breadth of the brook, a drawbridge linking his side and theirs. He has 2 daughters, Kathy and Victoria, who now live on the other side, the town side with their mother. When they were born, he says, "The first thing I did was dip them in this brook, a baptism. Holy crap, thank you, Jesus," he remembers thinking. "Thank you, Lord," he cries when he thinks about it. Came down, dipped him in the brook. Thank God for tender mercy that I raised myself up out of the scum and became a father, something so beautiful. He means his daughters. They too are a kind of recycling. I was reading the Bible and God says, "You don't need anything." He means anything new. Recycling, he says, it's the highest use. He refers to everything as FTD, from the dump. To make ends meet, Dave recycles wooden shipping pallets and takes carpentry jobs, and he receives a small disability check. He's a veteran, but the main source of his income is the rental of his house and the 7 small cabins barely visible on the property. We walk back to the house from the waterfall. Dave and his 3rd wife, Anna, who we met 5 years ago when she was living with her then husband in one of the cabins, have developed a call to find each other in the woods, a locating system based on a sort of sonar. He uses it now. It's a cross between the call of an owl and a dog, a hoo-ah, the importance or urgency measured in its repetition. Once means, "Where are you?" Twice means, "Come here," and 3 times signals an emergency. Dave hoo-ahs twice. He wants Anna to meet me. Anna is from Ukraine, where she used to be an art teacher and a working artist, but she moved to Dave's property with her husband, who is a graduate student of music at Dartmouth. He left, they separated, but she fell in love with the compound and its builder. She didn't leave. If I would try to find a piece of heaven on earth, this is it, she tells me. Her accent is so thick, sometimes it seems as if her words get stuck together. I find myself straining to pry them apart. She has a studio holed into the side of the main house where she mixes her paint in old Chobani yogurt containers. There's a kiln tucked in the corner where she works with ceramic, stringing together necklaces of homemade trinkets on copper wire. She also makes dolls with interposable joints, Dave brags. She says this is her idea of America, the American dream. Dave decides to make a bonfire. There's a hierarchy of materials here, he says. Low quality is used for bonfires. High quality is used for heat. Stacks of recycled papers, advertisements, and old envelopes provide the flammable base of the bonfire, onto which he throws a wooden pallet, a lattice of recycled wood, the ones he trolls for in local dumpsters. We look out over the brook, sitting in a semicircle around the growing flame. Dave's friend Jefff joins us. We grew up on the same street, Dave says. Jeff's phone is glued to his ear. He's hard-pressed for a ride to the Lebanon airport tomorrow. I can give you a ride, I offer. He's wearing a Calcutta t-shirt and army pants, an unlit cigarette dangling from his hand. The goal is to find someone with the same mental disease, he says, in between fielding phone calls. He's referring to Anna and Dave's marriage. Jeff is our spiritual advisor, Dave jokes. He's leading us down a path. Eventually the fire gets too hot, too high, and we scoot our chairs back in the dirt. Do you want some kombucha, Dave asks. I'm familiar with the fermented tea drink, but I'm only later made aware that Anna makes it with her own specially cultured colonies of bacteria. This is part 2, the ride-along. It's a few days later, and I'm riding shotgun in Dave's car to the dump in Wilder, Vermont. I won't say it's a sickness, Dave says, but it is a kind of obsession. Everybody is interested in something. It's just my mind gets kind of more relaxed when I'm doing something I'm in control of. I had told him I wanted to see him in his element, collecting, foraging, making house, and cultivating his kingdom. It's becoming less and less possible to go any place and pick through things. This place, I have a deal with them. I pay 18 cents a pound for anything I get here. And a lot of times, there's nice woodworking machinery, nice tools, all kinds of things. I've been doing this for so long that I've developed an eye. We weigh the car when we go in. The difference in weight when you come in and when you leave is how you pay, Dave tells me. 18 cents for every pound added. The red reading glasses that I've only seen perched on the top of his head now come down to his face. He starts picking over the heap of rusted metal and finds an old-fashioned drill, a wheel track for a sliding barn door, old ice tongs, a slide hammer, and an old change counter. He finds a handmade hook from an ancient anvil. If someone realizes what it is, it's like a historical antique. Hang it on your mantle. He sets the items on a stone wall next to us. Some things I just set there, because if I figure I don't want it, maybe somebody else will. He sees his ability to divine the precious items within the trash as a prowess, a calling. It's called gleaning. It's kind of skimming the high-quality stuff off. It's also referred to in the Bible. It says when you grow fruit or trees that you're supposed to leave 10% for the gleaners, the people who are traveling, who need something to eat along the way. I always carry that with me. It's kind of like one of those picture puzzles. I take it as a kind of riddle. It's like I show up, and it's the same with the mushrooms. You look at them for a while, and suddenly it's like it comes into focus, and it's like a truth revealed that not everybody has an eye for. To you, it's just a bunch of pieces of... He doesn't finish, but I know he means trash. Dave's father left his family when he was about 7 years old. His mother raised him and his siblings while working 2 jobs. She was just an amazing, amazing woman. I mean, you can't even begin to imagine it, he says. When they were kids, they lived for a time in their grandparents' basement in Mount Lebanon, a wealthy suburb of Pittsburgh, where they owned the first general store. Dave's mother would always take them to church. We would go there, and sometimes my mom would say, "No, today we'll go have pizza," or "Today we'll go to the park, this park or that park." That day she told us the park was just as much a part of the church. Dave hitchhiked a lot in his youth. When we were like 11, my mom would pack us all up in the car and drove us all across the country camping. That's when I loved to learn traveling around. It was just an amazing adventure. Every Easter from the age of 15 to 19, he would hitchhike to Florida. At 16, he hitchhiked to California. Just a blanket and a little Boy Scout's backpack, he says. Learned just about everything you could learn on that trip. I always read Huck Finn and Robinson Crusoe and Swiss Family Robinson and all that kind of stuff, where they land on an island somewhere and they have to figure out how they're going to survive, he tells me. When Dave joined the Army in his junior year of high school, he wanted to travel, to see the world. He describes himself as the anti-war type, but believed he had an obligation to serve and make it right. "So I went in as a carpenter. If it was good enough for Jesus Christ, it was good enough for me," he says. Joining the Army runs in the family. His uncles, his stepfather, and his father all served. He delayed his entry into the Army, tried to be a ski bum, but ended up working in a mine. He tells me about a time he fell and was injured at the mine. "Knocked me silly," he says. I remember looking. We had helmets with lights on them. So I look and I see, going down this, well, to me it was an infinite pit. My light had fallen, but it was on a cable, and it was shining a path. The helmet had come loose from the light, and it was going straight down like 1,000 feet. That was the last thing I remembered. I imagine this is it, his light in the tunnel, his truth revealed in a mountain of trash. When he delayed his entry into the Army, he also got a motorcycle, then got in an accident going 70 miles an hour around a hairpin turn on the way to see his buddy. hit a tree 20 feet up in the air, came crashing back down to earth. Wasn't my time, he says. He crushed his face and underwent several reconstructive surgeries. Not very good ones, he said, but I had to make it function. He's referring to his face. There's a decrepit motorcycle set away from the pile of metal trash at the dump, and he examines it, but doesn't touch it. He gave up motorcycles after that, he tells me. After my accident, I gave up all hope, figured that was the end of my life, so I went into the Army to get away, to try to go heal. Dave was in the Army for 3 years before he attended Dartmouth. It was at college where he experienced a spiritual voyage of carpentry. He was stationed southwest of Frankfurt in an engineering battalion. His main job was to blow up bridges in Germany and Russia, but he tells me he mostly wanted to build, not hurt. He could put a bridge up over the Rhine in 4 hours, he brags. Dave has told me about the underground bartering that happens at the dump. You trade people for things, he says, an incredibly unincriminating assertion that he worriedly disclaims. I shouldn't be telling you this, he says. For now, we've been alone at the dump, but a man pulls up with a 4x4 pickup truck. He stands on the back of the bed, tossing lost causes onto the pile. He's struggling with a table saw. Oh, that's what I've been looking for, Dave says. That saw have any chance? He yells across the expanse of the dump. I had it for a while, the man says. I just never used it. I tried to sell it for $75, but nobody wanted it. It's a good saw. An old porch swing clatters to the ground next, and it instantly piques Dave's interest. I got sick of it. It got all moldy and rotten, the man says. I got so much junk I'm tripping around the stuff. The thing about junk, though, you never have too much, Dave replies. It keeps coming right back. I got a magnet on my ass or something, the man says. Never too much junk, Dave says. One man's junk is another man's gold, the man replies. Exactly. After the man drives off, I probe Dave about how the underground bartering system really works. Well, just like I did there, he says. If he needs anything, like one fella asked me about, he wanted to brew some beer, was using plastic buckets, said keep an eye out for stainless steel containers. I could have exchanged for beer, but I have to bring in money, because I gotta feed my children, pay the expenses. I study the heaping pile of intertwined bodies of garbage, household relics stacked so high on top of one another, it's obvious little is meant for extrication, for viable reuse. Dave is studying the condition of the saw left behind. I study the pile behind him, where there's an old file cabinet toppled on its side, a smashed windshield, and a heavily rusted wheelbarrow. It's not like any fool can do this, he says. It's like you have to be a complete fool. A committed fool, I joke. Well, I haven't been committed yet, he says. He picks up a large chain, blighted by rust and filth. I really like chains. He doesn't weigh out when we leave. The ice tongs, the old change counter, the slide hammer still on the stone wall. All he takes is the chain, snaking it loosely around its own body of coils and stowing it in the back of the trunk. He waves past Tommy, his friend who works at the dump, as we drive out. I just realized I owe the guy some money, he says. We pass an old rusty tractor that stands on a patch of grass at the entrance. It's poised like a Civil War cannon. Did you fight in any wars? I'd asked him. Oh yeah, he replied. The war of the sexes, the war against poverty, the war of sexual expression, and the war of intimacy. He grins as he rattles off the imaginary combats on the fingers of his calloused and swollen hands. I ask him if he's very religious. Well, I've given my life to Jesus Christ. I used to go to church all the time. In the Army, I always went to church. Dartmouth, always went to church. But my first wife had no interest. My second wife wouldn't come. So I got kind of upset about it. Now if I sit in a church, I just cry. I never thought church was just a building. We drive away from the dump and he stops at a gas station. I'm just gonna have a soda or something, he says. I do all my recycling for nickels here. Get all my plastic bags here too, because they get millions of plastic bags. Once we're inside, he tells me he has to take a leak. Employees only. He drops a thick stack of warm quarters into my palm and tells me to buy a soda. I'll be right back, he says. It's the second time his hand has touched mine. I can see the grit in his fingernails, its permanence tattooed on his palm. He heads outside. I step up to the counter and exchange the majority of the sweating quarters for a small fountain drink. The cashier is a 20-something man, his eyes imploring me for an explanation. Dave and I make an odd couple. Dave comes back and fills an extra-large cup to the top with foamy Diet Coke. He jokes about being arrested again. He balances the cup in his hand as we drive along. His Las Vegas Lucky Chip keychain dangles from the ignition. We proceeded on our ride along through Lebanon, treating his favorite haunts like drive-thrus, hovering like bees migrating to the next hive so he can show me where he produces his honey. We drive up to the back entrance of King Arthur Flower, where the dumpsters are. This is our big stockpile for bonfire pallets, generally lower quality than the ones I save for building projects, but they're a mixture of softwoods and hardwoods, and the hardwoods we can use for heat to some degree, and the softwood ones we use for bonfires. They're stacked neatly in the dumpster, their discardedness, their futility an invitation to Dave for their recollection, their reappropriation. There's a couple places where they actually appreciate me getting rid of them, because they have to pay when it's full, so the longer they can keep it less than full, the better. We circle back around, driving silently through a Nissan dealership, through the aisles of freshly minted cars, their metallic hoods glinting in the sun. "We've been waiting for you," a man says, momentarily breaking huddle from a group of salespeople in the parking lot as we drive past them. "I'll get my money right now," he tells them, not slowing the car, simply driving by. "They've been wanting to sell me a car," he tells me. As we drive along Route 4 in Lebanon, a thundering convoy of motorcycles vibrates the road in front of us. Dave abruptly pulls over, reaching his arm and half of his face outside of the driver's side window, continually chanting, whoa, baby," as the bikers pass by on his side. "Veterans," he tells me. Then continues whistling, "Come on, baby, woo, hoo-ah, all the way, baby, let's go." He's attempting to give the procession a thumbs up, but his left thumb remains flattened, unable to erect itself. The result resembles the power nub of a political speaker. "How many injuries have you had?" I ask. I expect a list. He does not fail me. "I got a bunch of banged up parts," he says. 1, I cut this tendon here, on his left hand, so my thumb doesn't bend anymore until I get it surgically repaired. I was working on a tree, sawing, and I just nicked the back of my hand. Didn't realize I cut a tendon until I moved my wrist and pop, it's severed. I've scheduled surgery a couple times, but it just hasn't worked out. 2, I've had a bunch of head injuries, which isn't good. The mine, and when I was a kid, I fell on my head horseback riding, and I was hospitalized for a concussion. I had car accidents, fallen on it, his head, he means. Once I was in the military on orders and I fell, came on during an ice storm, fell right off the edge of the deck about 10 feet high. Ground was frozen, landed right on my shoulder. 3, I got a hip I injured in the military. 4, right ankle's been broken. 5, injured Achilles tendon in the Army. 6, my left elbow I chipped teaching ice climbing. 7, broken my hand a couple of times. 8, I've torn muscles in my back. Yeah, I've got it all. The result, he says, is that he can't sit or stand still. I have to keep moving, he pauses. "Have you had more than enough?" he asks me. My answer wouldn't matter. He has more to tell me. I remember this one fellow, called him the King of Vermont. He called me the King of New Hampshire. We would invariably meet at different dumps. We'd sit up there and just talk about what we'd found in our adventures and stuff like that. I think he's like I am. He's an amazing hoard of stuff.
The story is called The King of New Hampshire, a fact I deliberately omitted so that you could encounter that at the end of this selection, and it will be on 40towns.com this fall. And I should tell you that because we're in Vermont, after that section, Dave says to Lauren, "Do you want to meet a really odd character? Let me introduce you to the King of Vermont." And he is indeed an odd character. So there's much more there. Thank you, Lauren. Our next reader is Max Gibson, also from exotic Connecticut, Westport, Connecticut. And I said, "Can't we do any better than that?" And he said, "I was born in New York." And then you said someone in your family had been to Michigan once or something like this. So Max from Michigan, and his story roams the whole Upper Valley. You can read it now on 40towns.com. It's called The Max Grinder Experience. Grindr is a very popular app for phones, for gay men to locate other gay men. They can just meet up to talk, they can hook up, whatever. It works best in cities, naturally, where you can say, you can look on this and say, oh, great, there's someone else at the same bar I'm at, or there's someone a block away. Max had the brilliant idea to wonder how this app worked in a rural area, and to use that as a window into the experience of gay men in the Upper Valley. And so his travels took him all around the region. You would look on Grindr, and it wasn't someone a block away. Well, you can drive half an hour. And so it's a little bit hard to say where this story takes place, although he's going to read us an excerpt I think is mainly Lebanon. Is that right? Hanover. All right, so we're staying close to home here. But this is the Max Grindr experience, and because this piece has already been published, I can tell you a little bit about how it has gone out into the world. And it was an idea that as soon as I heard it, I said, this is going to be something that readers are going to think about. Grindr is something people write these sort of cultural criticism essays on. What is Grindr? What does it mean? And along comes Max Gibson, a sophomore at Dartmouth College, and all over the country, all over the internet, people said, oh, this guy has somehow gotten closer to this thing than all the professional writers pulling their hair and thinking, what are we to make of this? Here is a young man who has told us a true story. Max Gibson.
A few months ago, I downloaded Grindr for the 5th time. I had uninstalled it out of frustration. Frustration at the fact that most of the guys on Grindr in the Upper Valley are over 30. Frustration at the fact that most of the guys under 30 are closeted. Frustration at the fact that the small number of under 30 out of the closet guys are either A, too scared to actually meet me in person, or B, so sexually aggressive that I'm scared to meet them in person. This time would be different. Not wanting to attract the inevitable dick pics from the more audacious daddies, I tried to make my profile as unflirtatious as possible. For my profile photo, I chose a picture of me smiling in front of an American flag. Patriotic, clean, non-sexual. The contents of my profile. Tell me your story. 20 years old, 6'1", 165 pounds, white, toned, single. Headline, I'm writing about gay life in the Upper Valley. If you feel like sharing your story, hit me up. Not a journalist, can be discreet. Not just a writer, also here for friends, romantic prospects. I thought the stats section, age, height, weight, race, body type, relationship status, was required. It's not. And I chose to be honest in those fields, letting myself stroke my ego a bit with the toned part. I made a few flamingly obvious missteps. 1, using the word discreet. Closeted guys thought I was indirectly propositioning them. 2, claiming that I was not a journalist. This was just false. Although I didn't work for a newspaper, I was definitely not a journalist in the way I approached these men. 3, that last part, also here for friends' romantic prospects. At the time, I just had to hang on to that. Call me an optimist. I thought maybe this time Grindr might actually work for me. While waiting for my profile photo to be approved, no nudity or underwear allowed, I passed. I ventured over to the main screen of the app, which I've begun calling the marketplace. It's a 3-column array of square photos. Each square represents a different profile, each profile a different gay, bi, straight, questioning man in my area. Scroll down and the pictures keep coming. Faces, lips, nipples, dogs, playing cards, biceps, eyes, rainbow martini glasses, sunsets, feet. Some pictures have text overlaid. D17, straight curious, I heart pussies. Me, Mikey, Jeff, suck my D***K, country farm boy. Pictures are arranged based on proximity. People closest to you appear on top, scroll down for people farther and farther away. My Grindr marketplace begins with Instagrammed portraits of undergrads, some with shirts, some without shirts. Next, the grad students, recently returned from their world travels, posing in front of infinity pools, African mountain ranges, crumbling wonders of the ancient world. Scroll down a little farther to exit Dartmouth and enter the real Upper Valley, mustachioed or bearded middle-aged men in white t-shirts, all of them in beds, bathrooms, or closets. The occasional isolated young man with a profile description along the lines of, "Is anybody out there?" A smattering of photoless profiles, the discreet high school students and their discreet fathers. A cuddle bear in the driver's seat of a luxury SUV wearing gas station sunglasses and a consciously scruffy red beard. A bicep bulging out of a torn black shirt sleeve that holds up a fist with a chunky gold wedding ring. Ducky, with womanly shoulder-length hair, who smiles with his mouth while his blue eyes stare emptily at the camera. A hairy, muscular chest. A shaved, muscular chest. A cartoon of a bald eagle that is hopefully not a tattoo. A balding forehead with sunglasses. The bottom half of an army uniform tucked into tan work boots. A rainbow flag rippling in a blizzard. My first bite came quickly. Profile name, Go Socks, 5'9", 163 pounds, white, looking for chat, dates, friends, networking. The picture was of a mid to late 30s man in a Harvard t-shirt, smiling mischievously at the camera. He was crouching like a burglar in the sexual health aisle of a Walmart, struggling to keep 5 jumbo boxes of Lifestyles condoms from falling out of his arms. "Hi," he began. "Hi. What's up?" "Nothing much, just got out of class. You?" "Not much. Boned up. LOL. That was the end of the conversation. The first person I messaged was Dave, 25 miles away, 50 years old, 6'2", 160 pounds, white in an open relationship. Headline, book research. About, what was your growing up gay experience like? Researching for a possible new book. Contact me to learn more. It appears we have similar agendas. I pressed send and worried the message might come off as flirtatious. Dave responded, "Apparently, but from a different angle. However, I've had zero luck in getting kids on Grindr to talk. They seem to have the idea that this is just a subterfuge to get in their pants. Stranger danger still lives in their hearts. Yup, it's not the best way to strike up a serious conversation. Maybe we could help each other out?" He never responded. I could feel myself getting sucked back into the app. Grindr doesn't send notifications when someone messages you, so you need to actually open the app to see if you have any new messages. There's an automatic satisfaction when the orange opening screen fades into the marketplace, when the message icon in the top bar glows white and the phone buzzes. It buzzes once, twice, 8 times, depending on the number of new messages. The buzzes are an affirmation, the vibration of the phone in my hand more pleasurable than any digital pickup line any stranger's smartphone typed, "Nice to meet you, Max." I received a new message from a picture of a Lebanon high school bumper sticker. White letters on crimson. High school athlete, 18 years old, 5'8", 190 pounds, white average single. Hey. This was a story. A high school guy, probably closeted. I needed to step carefully. "Hi, how are you today?" "Good, you?" "I'm doing okay. So you're in high school? I remember those days. It can be hard sometimes." "What?" "Just it can be hard being gay in high school." "Oh. So are you a senior? What are your post-graduation plans?" "No." "Oh, a junior then? I assume senior because you're 18. "I'm not." "Not what?" "I'm 16. He had lied in his profile, a sophomore probably. Our conversation's legality was now in question. "So I don't know if you read my profile," I wrote, "but I'm writing about gay life in the Upper Valley. I'd really like to talk to you about what it's like to be queer and in high school and live here. Would you be up for that?" "What?" "I just think it would be pretty cool to get your perspective. Most of the guys on here are 30 plus, so it would be interesting to see what you have to say about all of it." "Oh, I thought that was a joke." Then his profile disappeared from the marketplace and from my messages screen. He had blocked me. Blocking someone on Grindr is a permanent action. If you block him, or if he blocks you, not only does his public profile disappear from your marketplace, but all the messages, all the photos, all the location markers you may have exchanged with him will disappear from both of your phones. Forever. In a city, this isn't a big deal. Walk over a few blocks and 100 new guys will pop up in the marketplace. However, in the Upper Valley, the low concentration of profiles makes each block that much more devastating. My inside source, possibly my only source, on gay teenage life was forfeited. 2 hours later, I opened the app again. 3 quick buzzes led me to the message screen. A different profile, also named high school athlete, had reached out. "Hey," he said, and sent a bathroom selfie. "It's me." He hadn't sent me a picture of himself before, but it was definitely the same kid. Clad in a lacrosse uniform that didn't quite fit him, he held his iPhone up with doughy fingers, knuckle bones softened with baby fat. He opened his mouth like he was preparing to smile, but he didn't reveal his teeth. The half smile pushed his cheeks up into rosy bubbles. His skin was clear. Maybe he wasn't old enough to have acne. He looked like an androgenized, mid-pubescent Shirley Temple. "Hi, new profile?" My other account got banned. Banned? Why? I had a guess. 'Cause I'm 16. How does Grindr know? People report me. Oh, yeah, LOL. So, any thoughts on getting lunch or coffee or something and talking about life? IDK, haha, I really just hook up, haha. Doesn't mean you can't try something new. I felt weird writing this. He responded, "I can't drive and live in the woods." How do you hook up then? I can drive. No pressure though, really. I was being too persistent, maybe a little creepy. Guys come to my house. Ah, I see. Your parents are okay with that. Mentioning his parents made me feel a little nauseous. With what? With guys coming to see you at your house? They aren't home, LOL. I track their phones when they leave. LOL, high tech. I was uncomfortable. LOL. Do they know about your orientation, I mean? No. I see. You must be very sneaky. Haha. The haha was to keep the mood light, to tone down the sliminess of the word sneaky, to play down the severity of what this high school kid, possibly under the age of consent, was doing. I couldn't talk to him anymore, but I didn't close the door in his face. I signed off, "Well, I've got to get my work done, but the offer stands." Why do gay men always end up talking about dicks? It was my first time meeting Mikey. We were at Lou's, the only diner in Hanover, New Hampshire, and a favorite spot for Dartmouth College students. We had just placed our order, an extended process for him. A waiter himself, Mikey made it his duty to keep those waiting on him entertained. When the waitress came by, he gasped and turned sideways in the booth to face her directly. The crow's feet around his eyes deepened as he smiled and reached out to touch her hand. When he was ready to order, he sat up straight and held the menu out in front of him, staring at it with a stiff neck. He ordered his BLT in a sing-song voice, the kind a child might use. The waitress walked away with our order and exchanged amused smiles with her daughter, who stood behind the counter, fiddling with the napkin holders. Mikey and I began gossiping about penises. The waitress and her daughter began gossiping about us. I wondered if they thought we were on a date. Mikey had recently moved back to the area from LA, and he was trying to use Grindr to immerse himself in the local gay community. In the About section of his profile, he wrote, "Looking for cool guys to hang out with and eat popsicles." But most of the Grindr guys Mikey met in the Upper Valley did not seem to want popsicles. They wanted sex quickly and with minimal conversation. "It's so nice to meet a nice, regular gay person," he said. "It's like people ask me about my dick. Do I want to top or bottom? And do you want to watch Star Wars or Star Trek?" "How are people so set in stone?" I said. "It's like, how can you know until you're with somebody, until you're touching them and they're touching you? How can you know what that chemistry is going to be beforehand?" With a forceful exhalation, as if relieved from a prolonged state of exasperation, Mikey nearly shouted, "Exactly! It's like people have always just assumed because I'm small and because he pointed at his crotch with 2 electrified hands, is that I go that way, but it's like, no." There was a Dartmouth student on Grindr who had expressed interest in hooking up with Mikey, but it wasn't going to happen. There were a couple reasons. One, Mikey knew it wasn't a competition, but this guy's member was so large, Mikey got scared just talking about it. 2, there was the age difference. As a waiter, Mikey serves a lot of the young gays of Dartmouth. The gays that come in are mean. They're prissy. It's like, he made a deep gurgling sound of disgust, rolling his big blue eyes to the ceiling. The other day, a Dartmouth guy came in with a gaggle of girlfriends, noticeably gay. Mikey complimented him on his hair. "I'm taken," the guy said. Mikey imitated him for me. "I'm taken." Mikey liked that I didn't automatically think he was flirting with me or trying to get in my pants. He said, "And like, I can tell you this, you're cute, because you are, but that doesn't mean I'm flirting with you. Have I flirted with you at all during this?" "I don't know," I said. I blushed. It was hard to tell. "Well, I haven't. If I was flirting with you, my hand would be on your thigh and my tongue would be in your ear right now." I laughed. I could feel my cheeks reddening. "My friend has a thing with the ears," he said. "It's never been a thing for me." "Oh, I really like it. And nipples, I don't know why, but I've always just been dead there." "Oh, wow, that's a really sensitive spot for me." The waitress and her daughter kept glancing at us between wiping down the counters and carrying trays in and out of the kitchen. As we were getting ready to go, Mikey put on his most effeminate voice and said to the daughter, "Girl, I'm gonna perm your hair." Then, turning back to me, dropping his voice half an octave, he said, "All they want is unicorns and rainbows and sprinkles." The performance had tired him out. A few days later, I was studying at a carrel in the basement of the library. It was quiet there, except for the buzz of fluorescents. My Facebook pinged a message from Mikey. "I will say, it really is tough being gay in this town." "I'm sure," I wrote. "Anything specific happen?" "Nah, just sitting here thinking about how much life is going on around the world and how nothing is going on here." Yeah. It also hit me that I never thought I would be single at 45 or that it would be so hard to find Mr. Right.
Thank you so much. Those were great. Great readings and great stories. And I know the audience looks forward to reading the full stories when they're up. I know Max's is up. And I just want to ask you first off, I'm going to ask a couple questions and then we'll open it up to the audience.
With this story, it was kind of scary for me to send it off into the world, because if you read the end of it, it sort of becomes a very, it was kind of not painful quite, but very troubling, reflection on, myself and my own relationships. And just to be, that open and, about what I really feel, I would say made the piece high stakes, and it actually made it easier to write because it had such, a emotional, climax, and also because, there's this outburst of my own that I needed to justify at the end.
So it was always high stakes because oftentimes how the interactions with our subject and how we depict them after, it's not often, or not always, not often, in a rosy light. You try and be as honest as you can, and especially since there were some preconceived notions about this man because he had just been arrested at Dartmouth, I personally felt there were some high stakes in portraying him, and just sort of out of that context and just with my interaction with him as a man and not as a part of this arrest, or not as defined by this arrest. So.
I actually faced some issues with that. Once the story was published on the web, one of the subjects, I misrepresented him according to what his view was, so we had to change some things, and that was just a very real confrontation with the high stakes of nonfiction writing, I would say.
Right,
I don't think you're being fair to yourself. You didn't misrepresent him.
Well,
he wanted...
Yeah.
He said, "You didn't get the part about how I'm very handsome and charismatic. Why didn't you put that in the story?" And that, that's the high stakes you hear in both these stories. And I think Max and Lauren are both wonderfully empathetic to the people they're writing about. They're empathetic, they're not necessarily sympathetic, and that's an important difference. They're not advocates for these people. They're trying to represent as faithfully as they can their understanding of them, their interaction with them, and that, of course, that's high stakes. That means you're putting someone else's life out in the world in a way it hasn't been before. And as much as the subject knows that, it can still be startling. And so Max encountered that with one individual who had given Max permission to use his name and then decided he didn't want his name used. And we thought that was fair enough. And he also disputed the color of a polo shirt. But I trust Max's color sense, but we nonetheless, it was like a blue-black. Is it blue? Is it black? We gave him the benefit of the doubt, but Max may have been right.
Lauren, has the King of New Hampshire seen this story yet?
Not yet. I did lots of fact checking with him, but I never disclosed the whole story or anything. So it hasn't been published yet. But
They never see it. They never see it ahead of time. And this is sort of generally a rule of this kind of long-form journalism. And when you give a story to someone before you publish it, well, now you're becoming more of a PR person than a storyteller. The honest contract that you can make with the person that I think Lauren has made with Dave, and I've seen the different drafts, so I know that there's details that change as you've gone and fact checked. In fact, in this latest draft, the man who was now he's a music graduate student. Before he was a music professor. That's a very important distinction. It may not seem so at this stage, but it is a very important distinction. That's how you keep faith. That's how they're keeping faith with these people, is not by showing them the story, but constantly checking the facts.
I've got some other questions, but I would like to open it up to the audience, and we can come back if there's.
I would be happy to deliver the mic to someone who has a question, but I have a quick question since I have the mic. And that is, it seems to me in what you just said, I think I'm having trouble with that there's a difference in media if you would change a piece after it's published. Now, Jeff, if you have a piece in GQ about skinheads in Russia, you don't change it if they don't like it. But if it's a web piece, there's more pressure to make an adjustment. So is that a basic difference?
It's a little bit what this man wanted changed were actually not. They felt like high stakes things to him. They were not. They were probably low stakes to the rest of the world. The color of a polo shirt, and changing his mind about using his name. Dave Vincelette is really a public figure because he's sort of a figure. He's in the news and so on. That's why he has to be named. The men you're talking about are not public figures. What's important about them is not a public record, but the account of how they feel, and so that becomes more possible. But I don't know. Maybe Max, you want to talk to just
about
the unsettlingness of that experience.
I was upset by it. Because I felt like I had accurately portrayed this guy, and I think for the most part I did. But I think that I actually kind of like it with the name change now, because in some way it makes it even more sad, or I guess, I don't know.
More sad?
Well, because now there's this idea that he's ashamed of the way that I've represented him, which is sad. Yeah. I think.
So are there any questions? It's dark out there. Well, while we're waiting, one thing that stands out in so many of these 40 Towns stories is the way in which the authors are not sort of hiding behind a third-person narrative. You are characters in your story, and you're not always neutral characters in your stories. And I think Max, at one point, a part you didn't read, he said, "Grindr is making me a hypocrite."
Yeah.
And there's some real realizations of your own moral standing, and that happens in so many of these stories. Is there something about this genre that is allowing that kind of insight to happen. And I know you asked the question a lot, Jeff, about whose story is it, and you asked students to grapple with that. So maybe you can speak to that.
Well, I think in class sometimes we talked about, I mean, dishonesty is a strong word, but there's sort of, the story is not as credible if you write yourself out of it, because, you know, everyone's going to tell this story differently. Max would tell the story very differently than I did, and if you tell it sort of objectively, it's not as true. I think that's part of the genre.
Also, I think part of it is if you do like sort of erase your own voice and character out of like a nonfiction work, you need to do a lot of research to like get the authority to do that in a lot of cases. But then for the things that we're writing about, I think it's so much about the experience of encountering this area that like having ourselves in the story is a very important part of it generally.
I think, Lauren, I mean, what's really interesting is that you have a Dartmouth history to your story, and you have this very unconventional Dartmouth alumnus, and there's an extent to which he's performing for this young person who has come, and your presence there becomes important, and I wondered how much you were aware of that he was sort of putting on, this is who he is, but he's also putting on a show. He wants to, in some ways, establish something to not just a younger person, but also someone who was now in a place that he was many years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in light of his recent arrest and the newfound publicity he was facing and things like that, I think there was a certain element to my interactions with him that he wanted to write his own story. He wanted people to know what he was really like, and so in some ways he was painting himself, and thankfully, I'm fairly shy, so thankfully I found a subject who loved to talk, so I would mostly just listen. But the reasons for his arrest are very complex, but he sort of wanted to publicize that and so I'll be very interested to see. A lot of his friends actually that I interacted with thought I was like a journalist who was advocating for his cause and I was like, no, I'm just writing a story. Some of his friends thought I was writing a book, so it was really interesting. I'm interested to see what they think my story is about.
We have a question.
I think you heard without the mic, but we'll go on mic. It's possible, to be a college student in a place and not really interact with your environment at all outside of your college. I don't know if you can kind of compare to your experience or this, how this experience has changed your college experience compared to maybe other students. But do you feel like this class makes any important change in that relationship between the college student and the outside world? Presents a unique opportunity in that respect?
Yeah, in short, I would say yes, definitely. Makes a huge difference. Just at Dartmouth, we get kind of like absorbed in our own little bubble, and just even like an awareness that there's like this whole other like life going on around us, and just knowing that like what your own individual experience is not like all the world. Like, it sounds obvious, but you kind of need to venture out to realize it.
Yeah, definitely changed my college experience as well. And this was very far out of my comfort zone, but it was also very interesting because where he lives, Mink Brook, it's so close to Dartmouth College. I mean, all my friends go running in Mink Brook. Everyone's pretty familiar with it, but most of them have no idea that he's there. They've never seen this house, and it's pretty visible. And so that was really interesting to explain to my friends. They simply had no idea who he was, and he's a Dartmouth 84. So I don't know. It was interesting.
You have that wonderful scene in the story where you're sitting. I think you're sort of sitting pretty close to the trail,
Yeah.
and people are just cruising by, and no one realizes that you and he are there,
Yeah.
which is creepy on one hand, and and on the other, I think reveals to us that it's not just college students that get trapped in their bubbles. This is the power of the genre. We all get trapped in these bubbles and don't realize that in Mink Brook there's this interesting character, or we don't think about what is Grinder like in the Upper Valley. I mean, Stratford, I think there's some, I keep hearing about some crime stories in Stratford that I want a student to write about. Stratford, crime in this beautiful little town. Who would think? Or really, saints among us, wonderful people that we don't know about. So that bubble, that's in some ways what's powerful, I think, about what they're doing is it's the bubble that they break out of is very similar to the bubble that we all find ourselves in.
Did the encounter with the two different people that you wrote about, sorry about this, change you?
Is that me?
I think it's for both of you.
For both of us. That's hard to say. I would say that it might not have changed me necessarily, but it changed the way. With Mikey, I would say it made me a little less optimistic about my future, unfortunately, for a brief period of time. I guess that changed me.
Yeah, it's hard to define as well. Definitely made me, I don't know if that's the right word, but more empathetic, especially in trying to relay the story, or not a story, his life. I don't know. It's hard to contend with. I just feel like I had a lot of responsibility. But yeah.
Do you feel like you've changed as writers?
Definitely. I think so.
Yeah. I had never really written nonfiction before this spring. So I think this summer term I'm doing a fiction writing workshop at Dartmouth, and I think that my fiction is a lot more true to life now, and I feel like even though there isn't an ethical obligation, like I feel an ethical obligation to my characters to like portray them honestly, even if they're not real.
This question's from Max. I read your piece before coming here. It's absolutely outstanding, and you should be very proud. In reading your piece, it's very clear that you're dealing with a lot of emotional things on your own, as well as your interaction with your subjects. Was there ever a point in working on that piece that you maybe took a moment and thought, you know what, this is getting a little too, real for me. Maybe I should write about something else, or maybe I can shift gears into a different direction?
No, that never really crossed my mind. Once I started to sort of venture out into this Grinder alternate world of the Upper Valley, it was pretty much all I could think about. And then even when it did become personal, that just made it all the more necessary for me to continue with it, I think.
So I'm wondering what it's like to be in a Jeff Sharlet workshop.
You want me to leave the room?
Pretend he's not here.
Terrifying.
They've got their grades. They're free now.
I don't know. It's pretty scary for me. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like a writer's almost at their most vulnerable when they're in a workshop, but it's also it's definitely the most helpful. It's definitely the most helpful experience for me, at least, I think.
Yeah, the thing that I liked about our workshops in the spring was that we never got hard copies of our classmates' work when they were reading them. We would just listen to them read it, and I thought that just sort of trained me a lot to pay attention to the language that my subjects were using as I went out and to research this.
Lauren, you say something really interesting about the vulnerability of a writer in a workshop, and I think that's actually a really good point. And it applies to your teacher as well, in the sense that if you're publishing something and you're going out in the world, you've been doing this for a while, you know, there might be good reviews, there might be bad reviews, but you sort of know how that is. That goes back to what I said at the beginning about the sort of envy as a positive emotion, about seeing these young writers doing work that, you know, I would be proud to have written either of these stories. And to realize, well, I don't get to do that distancing, and I'm the grand old man, and you can come to my class. I'm the senior writer in that classroom, but we're a group of writers, and on any given day, someone might be doing the best work around, and you can either be, you know, that's going to be frightening to a certain extent, but it's also going to be exciting, and that vulnerability, I think, is what hopefully makes it possible for you to develop as writers, but also for me, you know, reading your work and editing your work, and seeing the things that you're discovering about how stories can fit together. The King of Vermont, who's coming in this piece, that's a kind of such a virtuoso performance on the part of the King of Vermont and also on the part of Lauren, and bringing him to the page, that we were even talking about it. How could you even read this aloud? It would be a great challenge. And to see sort of Lauren figure out, how do I make this person live? Or to see Max struggle with, how do I make these text message conversations seem so vital as they do to me, and I hope they did to you. I felt like we're in a real dialogue. Those are writers really working with challenges and innovations that every writer does, and that vulnerability makes some great possibilities.
Just that we stop the formal part of the evening. Our readers will stay. We'll turn on the lights. There are books over here. And I neglected earlier to thank Paul Kiffner for our sound and lights. There's nothing worse than going to a reading and not hearing. So we're very grateful. Thank you to Max, Lauren, Jeff, and Hannah. And please stay as long as you like. But we're going to commence the conversation now. Thank you.